Bob, thank you, and thank you all for the energy you bring to this new progressive movement that's reemerging in our country, and I appreciate all of you being part of that. So many of you have worked, I know, Bob, I just look around this room, so many of you have worked so hard for so many years in very difficult times and didn't give up, and that's really the story of our country, and that's why I'm just thrilled what the Campaign for America's Future does, what American Prospect does, and all of you that are parts of either of those organizations and just people part of the progressive movement. Understand that it wasn't just a trailer, it was a double-wide trailer. It was a pretty nice trailer. And we've now moved into various places around Capitol Hill, but I didn't really care. I mean, it was in the Russell Courtyard, it's in the Capitol, and I still got a vote regardless of where our office was. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we've come from, and I think I'm looking at the program and talking to Emily and to Bob and just about sort of what the day's been about in looking at what you've had. I mean, it's clear that conservatism, this far-right neocon, however they term themselves, however we term them, has failed this country so badly. And when I hear all the adulation for Ronald Reagan still in the Senate and House from these members, and I look at the first Republican debate's going to be at the Reagan Library, I've heard more than a few people say the reason that Reagan is still popular among some, and perhaps more people than we care to admit, is because most of what he wanted to do wasn't carried out like it was in the Bush years, that we were able to stop some of the worst overreaching because of progressives, stop the worst overreaching of those years, and we see when we weren't able to stop much of it, what havoc they wreak when we've looked at the last few years. But that's the past. The future is beginning now, and this kind of new energy that Bob talks about really is there. It doesn't appear to be there in the Senate with the sort of lethargy of slow movement of the Senate in so many ways. And I want to talk for a bit about that. The best example of how you've all been around this and you can see what the House does and what the Senate does. The best comparison, the best example of a comparison between the House and the Senate, in some ways, believe it or not, is actually the room draw. In the room draw in the House, when you move into your offices, there are 435 House members. In December, by seniority, and then when you're class, you draw a number. When your name's called among the 435, you get 15 minutes to decide where your office is going to be. And so the House does all 435 by the end of December. So when you raise your right hand on the first Monday in January, you're in your office. The Senate, slowly as it moves, does it in a different way. They do it by seniority, but each member of the Senate gets one full day. And so they start with Bob Byrd, and Bob Byrd, who already has about a third of the office space in Washington anyway, and they ask Senator Byrd, would you like to move? And he says, well, give me a day to think about it. Although he probably doesn't. But then they go to Senator Kennedy and Senator Inouye, and then they go to Senator Stevens, and by the time it gets to, well, Tester's number 100, but by the time it gets to Bernie's 92 and I'm 93, and by the time it gets to us, it's March. So we move into our offices from the double-wide trailer into our offices, which is not really much use to know in any way, but I thought I'd tell you anyway. But when I think about this, I mean, the United States Senate, and I called about my first month in office, I called up the Senate historian. I said, send me a dozen books. Send me the names of about a dozen books about the Senate. And he did. He sent me a list, and my wife and I went on Amazon and ordered about 15 books, as it turned out, and I started to read them. And the history of the Senate is a history of a very slow-moving, often dysfunctional body that's often stood in the way of progress in this country. One of the books, a book called The Citadel by a New York Times reporter from Texas, whose last name is White, was a good friend of LBJ's, and his book is a bit more sympathetic to the Southerners and the Southern conservatives than I would have expected. But he actually wrote that the United States Senate is the South's revenge for Gettysburg. And that he wrote this in the 1950s when the Senate was stopping all of Richard Russell and Talmadge and that crowd were stopping, and Ellender and so many of the others were stopping any kind of real progressive movement in this country. I bring that up for this reason, and that is that about every 2 to 4 decades, there is a new energy in the Senate and a new movement, new progressive movement in this country when we really can change the country and change the world. And I'd like to talk about that for a moment. In the era of the Gilded Age and the conservative successes, if you will, the moneyed, entrenched, privileged interests of the turn of into the 20th century, and then the decade after that, when the robber barons reigned, and when those with wealth in so many ways parallel to our days ran the country, things began to change with the election of Woodrow Wilson. And the majority leader of the Senate in those days was a one-term senator from Indiana named John Worth Kern. And John Worth Kern was able to marshal the forces in 1913 through 1916 in the first real progressive era of this century. Everything from the progressive income tax to the federal workers' compensation system to the direct election of senators to a whole host of other progressive reforms, to the creation of antitrust, the Federal Trade Commission, all the kinds of things they did in those days to build a progressive movement in this country. Then 20 years later, a guy from Arkansas named Joseph Robinson was a majority leader in the Senate in the early days of Franklin Roosevelt. Between 1933 and 1936, another burst of progressive energy where the stars and the planets aligned, and we were able to make great success. We were able to make great strides to do what progressives cared about in those days with Social Security and Civilian Conservation Corps and all the kinds of things that in the Roosevelt Democrats with some progressives like George Norris and La Follette and others were able to do, again, to bring the country forward. Then another 3 decades passed until there was really progressive government again. And then in the mid-1960s with Mike Mansfield and JFK and especially LBJ and what they were able to do with the voting rights and with the Civil Rights Act and Medicare and Medicaid and the beginnings of the environmental movement, or the successes of the environmental movement. You look at that was 40 years ago, and I think history says that we are about to be in another progressive era that way, and I think that's why your work today is so very, very important. Your work in the 2004 elections when we came up short, but the fact that in states like Ohio, where we lost in 2004 and lost the whole election because of it, where people didn't give up and progressives just said, we're going to do it again, and they came forward and they pushed as you did all over the country. And then you look who was elected in this class, as Bob points out, in 2006. The media first said it was a bunch of moderates. I don't know quite what that meant, but it was a bunch of every one of us, a progressive, pro-labor Democrat that cares about all the issues that you care about. And with very few exceptions on very few issues, are we not a group of outspokenly progressive members? And you look, we only have 51 members of the Senate, obviously now, not all progressive, but the fact that there's a progressive, a strong and increasingly large progressive core, and how we're able to push others forward. But it's going to take a few more. It's going to take the elections of 2008 and a Democratic president. And I think then we will look back in 20 years and look at what happened in the mid-2000, however they say this first decade of the century, and what we're able to do between 2007 and 2012 or whatever period of time. This progressive movement that I think we're building is going to really matter. So that to me is the lesson in many ways of the 2006 election, what we have to look forward to. And I hear, and when I think about the whole host of issues that we can matter on in the next 5 years, principally, obviously, universal health care, and whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's working with the states that they deliver universal health care and the feds help to fund it, whichever direction we go in, but whichever individual program or individual move we pick, working together in the states and the federal government, we're going to see universal health care in the next 5 years, and we're going to see serious alternative energy. I look at my state, and we have all kinds of opportunities as a big agriculture state and a big manufacturing state on all kinds of universal or all kinds of alternative energy. Oberlin College has the largest building on any college campus in the country that is fully powered by solar energy, but they had to buy their solar panels in Germany and Japan. There's no reason that we don't have a domestic steel, domestic industry that builds solar panels, that builds wind power, the wind turbines, that that does all the kinds of alternative energy that we can do. And it's a win all the way around, as you know. It stabilizes energy prices. It creates jobs. It's good for the environment. It's good for our balance of trade. It's good to put our workers back to work, all of the kinds of things it does in that way. And those are a couple of the issues that I think are going to play big. Certainly embryonic stem cell research, certainly all kinds of social justice and economic justice issues that you can name on 10 fingers quickly have real opportunity in the next 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years. This is the year to continue to push to do them. This is the year to continue to work to end the war in Iraq, to continue to work on embryonic stem cell research, to continue to work on Employee Free Choice Act, to continue to work on minimum wage and all these issues that we've still come up short. We're going to get minimum wage, but we still come up short. Either the Senate doesn't pass it because of the 60-vote rule, or the president vetoes it, that we just keep at them and keep at them and keep at them and keep at them. And if we don't get it this year, we'll either get it in '08 in an election year, or we will in '09 on every one of those issues. I'll just close, and then I want to take your questions on I just want to tell you a story of something that happened soon after I got elected. I think in February, we all in the Senate sit on 4 or 5 committees, so things are always kind of meeting at the same, committees are sort of meeting at the same time. And I went to 2 committees one morning, back to back, and started the Agriculture Committee. And we're writing the Farm Bill this year. One of the most important parts of the Farm Bill is the food stamp program. Understand that the average food stamp beneficiary in this country gets $1 per meal per person. So a mother with 2 children gets $9 food stamps a day. So it's hardly a bloated program that just gives money out right and left, as you know. And there was a woman from Hamilton, Ohio, from my state, whom I'd never met before, that came and testified on the food stamp bill. And she was a single parent of a 9-year-old boy, and her ex-husband was out of work and wasn't providing any significant help to her. And she said at the beginning of she holds a full-time job. Her name is Rhonda Stewart, and she holds a full-time job. She is president of her local PTA with her child's school. She is active in the Cub Scouts, and she teaches Cub Scout parents, and she teaches Sunday school, holds a full-time job, gets food stamps. Every month, she said, at the beginning of the month, her son enjoys the beginning of the month because she serves him pork chops once or twice that first week, and she takes him out to a fast food restaurant once or twice in that first 10 days of the month. But she said at the end of the month, almost invariably, she sits at the kitchen table with him while he eats dinner, and Mom, what's wrong? Well, I'm just not hungry tonight, son. And it happens a couple of times at the end of every month where she just runs out of money. So she doesn't eat as her son eats the last few days of the month. And an hour later, I go to the Banking Committee, and Secretary Paulson was testifying in front of the Senate Banking Committee. And I told him this and some other stories about that I wanted to sort of illustrate the underbelly of the economy, if you will. And he said, almost interrupted and said, Senator, you don't understand. We had 2.5% economic growth last quarter. This country, things are going really well in this country. And that's the story that we need to point out to people, that profits are up, executive salaries are up, but wages haven't been. You've seen these statistics of 1946 to 1973. If you divide the country into 5 income categories, the lowest 20% had the highest percentage income growth in the country, over the other 80% from 1946 to 1973. From 1973, the year, not coincidentally, that we went from trade surplus to trade deficit, from 73 to 2000, all had economic growth. The fastest was the top 20%, the lowest, the weakest economic growth, the income growth was the lowest 20%. Since 2000, only one quintile has seen wage growth at all, and that's the wealthiest 20%. You know all that, but we need to tell that story, and we need to tell that story by juxtaposing the Rhonda Stewarts of the world with the Secretary Paulsons of the world, and why this society cries out for leaders and activists who fight for and care about social and economic justice. And that's my job. That's the job so many of you have done, some of you as long as 20, 30, maybe more years. And I just encourage you to not give up, to keep going. This really is our time as progressives to begin to change this country. I really believe in sort of the cycles of history. And if you look at the history of this country in the last 100 years, all things are coming together. The public agrees with us on every major issue, on education, on health care, on trade, on stem cell, on choice, on every major issue. The public and progressives in the Democratic Party are in the same place, and this is our opportunity to move forward. We need to seize the moment and take advantage of it every day, every week, every month, every year. Thank you. Question?